Jan Zizka, the complete story of the Hussite commander. Jan Zizka of Trocnov was a Hussite commander and one of the greatest tacticians in military history of the Middle Ages. He led the Hussite forces against the King of Bohemia, Sigismund of Luxembourg. He was the mastermind and one of the first to implement an advanced battle technique known as the wagon fort, which became a cornerstone of Hussite warfare. Sit back and listen to the story of Jan Zizka, who rose from being a bandit to a leader of the Hussite armies. Jan Zizka was born around the year 1360 in the small settlement of Trocnov in southern Bohemia, which is now part of the municipality of Borovany. A legend is associated with his birth, mentioning the so-called Zizka's tree, under which the future Hussite commander was supposedly born. According to the legend, his mother was rushing home from the fields before a storm when labor pains overtook her beneath a mighty oak tree. Under the trunk of the old oak, she gave birth to her son, whom she named Jan. As years passed, increasing attention was paid to the place of Zizka's birth. In 1682, the provost of the Borovany monastery had a chapel dedicated to Saint John the Baptist built near the oak. However, people continued to venerate the tree, even referring to the new structure as Zizka's chapel, which led the provost to have the oak cut down and burned. The chapel was eventually demolished in the spring of 1867. It wasn't until 1908 that Adolf Joseph Prince of Schwarzenberg, at the urging of Czech historians, erected a stone monument at the site, inscribed with, "Here was born Jan Zizka of Trocnov." Between 1360 and 1400, very little is known about the future Hussite commander. According to anthropologists who examined Zizka's skull, which was discovered in 1910, he lost his first eye around the age of 11. Young Zizka suffered a sword wound that ran diagonally from the center of his left eyebrow to the left nostril, a dangerous injury that led to blindness in that eye. It was a miracle that he survived. Pope Pius II, who relied on accounts from direct participants of the Hussite wars, mentions in his Historia Bohemica that Zizka was poor and had been raised at the royal court from childhood. This suggests that Zizka may have entered the court during the reign of Emperor Charles IV. However, how long he stayed there remains unknown. The first authentic mention of him is dated April 3rd, 1378, when Jan Zizka is listed as a witness in a marriage contract. Based on this document, it is assumed that Zizka must have been of legal age at that time, meaning he was likely born around 1360. Between 1378 and 1384, Zizka's name appears in several property records, suggesting he faced long-term financial difficulties. Further records of Jan Zizka emerge only between 1406 and 1409, when execution registers from the South Bohemian Rosenberg and Jihlava courts reveal that he operated as a bandit in the Rosenberg domain. Through this activity, he learned new combat tactics, including ambushes, and developed organizational and military skills that he would later use in leading the Hussite wars. Zizka likely turned to banditry out of necessity, declaring open hostility against a nobleman, Henry III of Rosenberg, and the royal city of České Budějovice. It is possible that he was forcibly stripped of his small hereditary estate, which was not uncommon at the time, and that he saw banditry as a means to fight injustice and reclaim his rights. Many stories and legends about Zizka's bandit years depict him as a just outlaw who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. This romanticized version of his exploits contributed to his later popularity as a folk hero. The reality, however, was likely more complex and darker. Zizka sought every opportunity to harm his enemies and used local outlaws led by Matthew the Leader, who cared only about personal enrichment. The group camped in various locations, relying mainly on robberies, hostage-taking for ransom, and attacks on small towns. Some of Zizka's companions were eventually captured, tortured, and executed, including Matthew the Leader. Zizka's outlaw career ended on April 25, 1409, when he received a royal pardon absolving him of all previous crimes committed as a bandit. This pardon was issued by King Wenceslas IV and allowed Zizka to leave his outlaw life behind and rejoin society legally. The reasons for this clemency are unclear, but it is believed that Wenceslas IV needed to stabilize the country and gain support from broader social groups, including those involved in banditry. By granting amnesty, Wenceslas not only reduced crime, but also secured loyal followers who could later become valuable allies in political conflicts. Thanks to the Polish chronicler Jan Długosz and his Annales Poloniae, we know that between 1409 and 1411, Jan Zizka served as a mercenary for Polish King Władysław II Jagiełło in battles against the Teutonic Order. It is believed that Zizka took part in the Battle of Grunwald, which took place on July 15, 1410. This battle was one of the largest medieval engagements and a significant milestone in Central European history. The Battle of Grunwald was a decisive clash between the allied forces of the Polish-Lithuanian Union and the Teutonic Order. The Teutonic Order was a powerful military organization controlling much of the Baltic region, and the Polish-Lithuanian Union, led by Polish King Władysław II Jagiełło and Lithuanian Grand Duke Vytautas, decided to confront this power. The battle was one of the bloodiest of the Middle Ages, involving tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides. The Polish-Lithuanian army advanced north and met the Teutonic forces between the villages of Grunwald, Tannenberg, and Ludwigsdorf. The battle began with a clash of both armies, with the Polish-Lithuanian units having the advantage due to their numerical superiority and better strategy. The fighting was fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Ultimately, the Polish-Lithuanian forces gained the upper hand and began pushing the Teutonic knights off the battlefield. The battle ended in a crushing defeat for the Teutonic Order. The victory of the Polish-Lithuanian Union significantly weakened the Order's power and strengthened the Union's position in Central Europe. As an experienced soldier, Zizka likely fought in the front lines. In medieval records, Jan Zizka reappears in 1414 when a judicial record from Prague Newtown notes that a certain Janek, a royal gatekeeper for King Wenceslas, purchased a house on Na Przykopie Street from Václav Stoherka. In 1416, he sold the house and used part of the proceeds to acquire a residence on today's Pařížská Street. The court register refers to the former gatekeeper Janek as a squire at the royal court. What Zizka did between his time in Poland and the beginning of the Hussite Wars remains unclear. Some unverified accounts claim that he participated in the 100 Years' War in the service of Henry V of England and fought in the Battle of Agincourt. It is also possible that after leaving Poland, he served as a soldier in Hungary, Denmark, and Lower Saxony, or even as a chamberlain to Queen Sophia of Bavaria. Jan Zizka made his first major mark on history on July 30th, 1419, when he joined a Hussite procession in Prague, led by the priest Jan Żelivsky. The crowd gathered in front of the new town hall, demanding the release of several imprisoned Hussites. When the city council refused their demands, the crowd stormed the hall and threw the councillors out of the windows. This event, known as the First Prague Defenestration, is considered the beginning of the Hussite Revolution. 17 days later, King of Bohemia, Wenceslas IV, reportedly died of a heart attack after hearing about these events. The Hussites subsequently took control of the city and expelled their opponents. Although there are multiple theories about Zizka's transformation into an ardent supporter of the Hussite movement, there is no definitive evidence explaining why this shift occurred. It is possible that he was influenced by the teachings of Jan Hus and his criticism of church corruption. He may have also been drawn to the Hussite movement's promise of social and economic justice. Another possibility is that he saw an opportunity to gain power and influence, using his military skills to strengthen his position and reputation. In December 1419, Zizka left Prague with his followers and moved to Plzeň, one of the wealthiest cities in the Kingdom of Bohemia. His departure was driven by dissatisfaction with the wavering policies of the Prague City Council and the need to establish a base for his campaign against Queen Sofia and royalist forces. Zizka spent 5 months in Plzeň, where he assumed an informal role as an authoritative military leader. During the first days of his stay, he and his Hussite allies expelled part of the Catholic population. In the following weeks, he launched raids against small enemy strongholds in the surrounding areas. During one such operation, targeting the Nekmij fortress, Zizka and his 300 men, accompanied by 7 wagons, were ambushed by cavalry and infantry forces of the Plzeň Landfriede under the command of a nobleman, Bohuslav of Schwamberg. Zizka's forces successfully repelled the numerically superior and better equipped enemy using the wagon fort, a tactic he had learned in his earlier years. This innovative military technique became one of the key elements of Hussite warfare and was successfully used in many future battles. On March 1st, 1420, Pope Martin V issued the Omnium Plasmatoris Domini Bull, in which he declared a crusade against the Hussites, labeling them as heretics. The Pope entrusted King Sigismund, who had claimed the Bohemian throne after the death of his brother Wenceslas IV, with leading a military campaign against them. Sigismund, the son of Charles IV and the King of the Romans, Hungary and Bohemia, was determined to crush the Hussite movement, which posed a direct challenge to his authority. He accepted the papal decree and launched a crusade against the Hussites. On March 23rd, Zizka left Plzeň and headed toward the developing stronghold at Tábor. Along the way, his forces were attacked by enemy units operating in the Písek region. In what became known as the Battle of Sudoměř, Zizka and his 400 infantrymen, both men and women, accompanied by 12 wagons and 9 horsemen, successfully repelled an estimated 700 to 2,000 enemy troops. Following this victory, the Hussites marched to Tábor, where they began to consolidate their forces from southern and western Bohemia. In the early days of the Táborite community, they elected 4 captains as their leaders, one of whom was Jan Zizka. On May 3rd, King Sigismund, leading a massive crusader army composed of German princes and adventurers drawn by the promise of looting, captured Hradec Králové and later Kutná Hora. On June 30th, he reached the walls of Prague. The Prague citizens, threatened by Sigismund's army, pleaded for help from the Táborites. In response, Zizka and his commanders marched to defend the capital. Zizka and his troops took a strong defensive position on the Vitkov hill, located in what is now the Žižkov district of Prague, named in his honor. On July 14th, the Crusaders launched an assault on Vitkov hill, aiming to break through the Hussite defenses and open the way to Prague. The attack came primarily from the south and east. Zizka and his men successfully repelled multiple attacks using the natural terrain and wagon fort tactic. The Hussites employed firearms, crossbows, and slings, which proved highly effective against the heavily armored knights. In a decisive moment, the Hussites managed to surprise the Crusaders and launch a successful counterattack on their flanks. Zizka's tactical genius and the bravery of his soldiers led to the collapse of the Crusader formations. Many Crusaders fell from the steep cliffs and perished. After hours of fierce fighting, the Crusader forces were forced to retreat in defeat. The Hussites secured a crushing victory and maintained control of Prague. Following the collapse of the Crusade and the retreat of the enemy forces from Prague, Zizka's name became widely recognized across Europe. His authority grew, not just in Bohemia, but beyond its borders. Historical sources remain unclear about Zizka's involvement in conflicts between the Hussite factions of Tábor and Prague, or in the destruction of monasteries and the killing of Catholic priests and monks in the areas surrounding the Czech capital. His name was first officially recorded again in early August 1420, when he, on behalf of the Táborites, sealed an official document granting full power to a Hussite delegation sent to Poland to negotiate the possibility of offering the Czech throne to a Polish ruler. On August 22nd, Zizka left Prague and headed to southern Bohemia, where he inflicted significant damage on both secular and ecclesiastical estates, particularly in the Rosenberg domain. On November 12th, he captured the town of Prashatice, massacring all the men while expelling women and children. On November 18th, Zizka negotiated a truce with Oldrich of Rosenberg in Pisek, bringing the first phase of the Taborite autumn offensive to an end. Shortly afterward, Zizka's forces marched toward Prague. On December 4th, they joined other Taborite forces at Ziciny Castle, waiting for the garrison to surrender. When the castle's gates were finally opened, Zizka ordered the execution of 9 Catholic priests, having his troops burn them alive along with 2 other captured clergymen. At the beginning of 1421, Zizka continued his campaign against the King of Bohemia, Sigismund of Luxembourg. On February 14th, he took part in the siege of Plzeň, which at the time was held by Catholic forces. The Plzeň garrison requested a truce until the end of the year, pledging that within a month they would accept the 4 Articles of Prague, which were the core theological principles of the Hussite movement, receiving communion under both kinds, bread and wine, free preaching of the Word of God, prohibition of the secular rule of clergy, punishment of mortal sins. However, the Plzeň garrison broke the agreement. After the failed siege of Plzeň, Zizka led his forces to Chomutov, which he stormed on March 16th, burned to the ground, and massacred 2,400 inhabitants. He then returned to Prague and launched an attack on Berun, where he burned over 40 Catholic clergymen. Afterward, Zizka returned to Tabor, where he dealt with the Hussite heretics known as the Picards. He captured 50 men and women from this sect and had them burned alive in the village of Klokoty. Zizka's forces continued their campaign, burning churches and capturing numerous towns, including Trudim, Vysoké Mito, Policzka, Litomyšl, and Jaromír. During the siege of Rabí Castle, Zizka lost his second eye. Despite his complete blindness, he remained one of the most formidable military leaders of the Hussite movement. At the end of 1421, Sigismund once again attempted to subdue Bohemia and began gathering crusader forces from various parts of Europe. One of the first major events of the Second Crusade was the Battle of Žlutic, where the blind but otherwise healthy Jan Zizka, protected by wagon forts, withstood enemy assaults for 3 days. In the end, Zizka's forces broke through enemy lines and managed to reach reinforcements sent from Žatek. On December 1st, Zizka arrived in Prague and led his army to Kutná Hora, where Sigismund's forces had already arrived and laid siege to the city. Zizka commanded the combined Taborite and Prague armies, and although their artillery managed to hold off Sigismund's elite heavy cavalry, the Hussites faced the imminent threat of destruction due to the encirclement. On December 21st, Zizka formed his battle wagons into a column and launched an attack on enemy lines. The battle wagons, moving swiftly with all their cannons, broke through Sigismund's formation, allowing the Taborites to escape the siege. Sigismund, wrongly believing that he had already defeated the Hussites, chose not to pursue them. This was a grave mistake because Zizka reinforced his troops and, on January 6th, launched a surprise attack near Nebovidi, close to Kutná Hora. Caught off guard and scattered across a vast area, the Crusaders were unable to organize an effective defense. Sigismund lost 12,000 men and barely escaped with his life. In January 1422, a decisive battle took place at Nemyky Brod, where Sigismund's army suffered a crushing defeat. After the battle, Sigismund's loyal commanders held out behind the town's walls, resisting Hussite artillery bombardment. Zizka began negotiating their surrender and a truce was declared. However, a faction of the Hussites ignored the ceasefire and, without Zizka's consent, stormed the city, killing 1,500 soldiers and civilians. In April 1422, the Lithuanian prince Sigismund Korybut arrived in Bohemia. The Hussites sought to install him as the ruler of the Czech lands in place of Sigismund of Luxembourg. On June 11th, Zizka and the Taborites officially confirmed to the people of Prague that they accepted the Lithuanian prince as their governor. However, conflicts later arose between Korybut and Zizka, leading to a failed Taborite attempt to seize control of Prague. Zizka then continued fighting in southern Bohemia, personally leading sieges on Beshynia, Strakonica, and other fortified settlements. At the beginning of 1423, tensions within the Hussite movement escalated, leading to a civil war. While radical Hussites, led by Jan Zizka, pushed for strict church reforms and continued war against Catholic forces, more moderate Hussites and some nobles sought compromise and reconciliation with the Catholics. In 1423, Zizka led his army to Horice, where he fought against Czeniec of Wartenberg, a noble who renounced the chalice and swore allegiance to Sigismund. Zizka strategically positioned his troops on high ground. According to legend, enemy cavalry dismounted and ascended the hill on foot, but by the time they reached Zizka's wagon fort, they were so exhausted that his forces easily slaughtered them. While the exact details of the battle are uncertain, historical accounts confirm that as the Catholic forces approached the wagons, they were bombarded with artillery, handguns, and crossbow fire before engaging in close combat. Shortly after this victory, news arrived that a new crusade against the Hussites was being prepared. This forced the rival Hussite factions to agree to a temporary truce. Despite the ceasefire, Zizka marched to Hradec Králové, which was controlled by moderate Hussites, and seized the city. However, the peace between Hussite factions was short-lived. On August 4th, the two Hussite armies clashed in the Battle of Strachov Courtyard, where Zizka achieved a decisive victory. During the battle, he reportedly killed a Catholic priest with his mace, who had been carrying the Eucharist on the Prague side. This suggests that, despite his total blindness after the siege of Rabi, Zizka may have retained some residual vision, allowing him to perceive shapes at close range. Later in 1423, Zizka planned a campaign into Hungary to spread Hussite ideas and weaken Sigismund's rule over the region. However, historians remain divided on whether this invasion actually happened or if it was a later myth based on the 1431 campaign of the so-called orphans, which is how Zizka's soldiers called themselves after his death. In 1424, Hussite priest Jan of Rokycany brokered peace between the rival Hussite factions. A few days later, they agreed to a joint military expedition to Moravia, where Duke Albert, Sigismund's son-in-law, was operating. On September 23, 1424, the Hussite forces set out, but each faction marched separately. During the campaign, Zizka decided to act independently and laid siege to a castle near Przybyslav. A few weeks later, on October 11, 1424, Jan Zizka died at the siege of Przybyslav. The exact cause of his death remains unclear, but several theories exist. The most commonly cited explanation is that Zizka died of an infection or disease. Some historians suggest he suffered from a severe skin infection, possibly carbuncle or furuncle, which could have led to sepsis, a life-threatening bacterial infection. Other theories propose that Zizka succumbed to old battlefield wounds, which, despite healing, had long-term health effects. Another alternative theory is that he was poisoned, possibly with arsenic. Zizka's death was a major loss for the Hussite movement, as he was one of its most successful and influential military leaders. It is believed that Zizka's parents were named Jehoz and Johanna. Throughout his life, Zizka likely married two women, both named Katarzyna. Little is known about his siblings, but historical records confirm that he had a brother, Yaroslav, who managed Kalisz Castle before being executed, and a sister, Agnieszka. Sources also suggest Zizka had at least one daughter, who married a man named Jindřich or Ondřej of Duba. According to legend, when Jan Zizka sensed his death approaching, he ordered his followers to flay his skin after his passing and turn it into a war drum. This drum was then meant to accompany the Hussite army in battle, inspiring his troops even after his death. Zizka's successor was the radical Hussite priest and military leader Prokop Holy, later known as Prokop the Great, who continued the Hussite wars for another 10 years. And that concludes the story of one of the most famous Czech historical figures, a man who defined an entire era of Czech history. Would you like to hear more about similar topics? Let us know in the comments.